So here he has number 7, which is on page 83, Psil Techeiles. The mitzvah of tzitzis includes not just a study of the different kinds of begadim and the number of knafos that we discussed, but also putting on a Psil Techeiles in its tzitzis. So we're going to go through the sources for Psil Techeiles, and then we'll try to figure out what is Techeiles and whether that mitzvah applies today. So there are 2 parts to tzitzis. There's lavan and Techeiles. The Torah says that Daber b'nei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem, v'yasulem tzitzis al kanfei v'gdeihem l'dorosam v'nasnu al tzitzis hakanaf Psil Techeiles. Rashi on Chumash in Bamidbar Perek Tesvav writes, v'yasulem tzitzis al shem ha'psilim hatluyim ba Kamo Vaikacheni Pasuk in Yechezkel B'tzitzis Gavarach Tzitzis Al Shem Urisav also Kamo Meitzitz Min HaCharichim. So now we have machlokes whether or not Techeiles, the Psil Techeiles, is critical, and can you fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis without Techeiles? The Gemara is in Menachos Daf Lamed Ches, U'Re'isam Oso Malamed Shema'akvim Zed said Divrei Rebbe v'Chachomer Ein Ma'akvim. Oh, Shalom Aleichem. At the bottom of page 83, the pasuk says U'Re'isam Oso, and this is a pasuk which uses the singular oso, and Rebbe derives from that there's one entity, Malamed. This teaches us Shema Akvim Zed Zed, that we need both what we call lavan. We'll see how many chutim of lavan, and then we need Psil Techeiles. Chacham omrim ein ma'akvim. Chachamim say, as you'll see in Rashi on the bottom of the page, so even though the Torah commands us to put Techeiles, that means 2 chutim of tzitzis that are made of Techeiles, which is called a psil in the biblical language, nevertheless the Chacham say, Ein zema akiv zevi ovid arbasam Techeiles or arbasam lavan yotza. So Rashi is really clear that in our time, if we don't have Techeiles, we'll see whether or not we have Techeiles or not. Then we can fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis with 4 chutim of lavan, which again we double over, so it becomes 8 chutim on each one of the corners of the beged. Now this might be just an application of the general rule. Then in machlokas between a yochid and a rabbin, we pass like the rabbin. So since the Chacham rejected Rebbe, and Rebbe was of the opinion that a Techeiles ma'akeves salavan, which means that according to Rebbe today, that we don't have Techeiles, you cannot fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzis. But we pass like the Chacham.
So according to Rebbe, what I wear now without Psil Techeiles would be usher because it's a 4-corner garment.
Correct. You should probably avoid wearing a 4-corner garment. In fact, you all heard of Rabbaran Soloveitchik?
I heard about that. Yeah.
Rabbaran didn't wear tzitzis on Shabbos in public because he felt that if there's no kiyum of tzitzis, according to Rebbe, because Techeiles ma'akeves halavan, and you can't have tzitzis without Techeiles, then tzitzis becomes a masui. It means it's carrying. The only reason why tzitzis is not carrying, and it's not really a malbush because the chutim are not covering your body, is because it is part of the beged, and it's only part of the beged because of the mitzvah.
So he didn't hold that it was usher to wear the 4-corner garment at a different time in deference to Rebbe.
Right. In other words,
Just
the
enough
ikar adin, as far until we get to Shabbos, where we're talking about an Isur skila on Shabbos, we're talking about the most severe Isur, then we go like the psak, we accept the Chacham Shita, and that is that Eina Techeiles ma'akeves halavan, which means you could be yotzei tzitzis without Techeiles. But when you get to Shabbos and you want to carry the tzitzis on Shabbos, then Rabbaran was very nervous about that.
Not even carrying, you're saying he held wearing as a din of carrying because it's not a beged.
Correct. If it's not part of the beged, then you're carrying it. It's a maser. I mean, that's not the Chiddush Rabbaran. That's clear from the Sugis and Shas. But Rabban's chiddush is that we have to be choshesh for the sheet of Rebbe, and therefore we can't wear tzitzis out in public. Again, if you have an Erev, it's not a problem, but I guess he was there in Chicago, wherever he was, where there was no Erev. But we don't paskin like that at all. We paskin that the halach is like the Chachamim, and you'll see that here on page 84. The Rambam in Hilchos Tzitzis Perek Aleph says, "Hatchelas eino ma'akvis al lavan." So that means that you can make all the tzitzis from lavan. And the Rambam paskins like the Chachamim that tchelas is not ma'akev. Now, even though tchelas is not ma'akev, the Torah does command us in a mitzvah doraisa to put tzitzis of tchelas on a begodim. So the question is, what is tchelas, and can we produce tchelas in our time?
Is that considered, the way that you read it, is that it's two separate mitzvahs? That there's tchelas and tzitzis, or that?
So this is a big discussion in the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs, not the Rambam in Hilchos Tzitzis. And if I'm not mistaken, the Rambam paskins that tzitzis only counts as one mitzvah in Taryag, and other Rishonim disagree with him, and they say since you could be Mekayim tchelas without Lavan and Lavan without tchelas, therefore we should count it as two separate mitzvahs, because basically the Rambam agrees that tefillin is counted as two separate mitzvahs because ein hatefillin ma'akvos zuitzu. So if you only have a shel rosh, you be mekayim a shel rosh, etc. So if we apply the same logic to tchelas, then Lavan and tchelas are really two separate mitzvahs because they're not ma'akvos zuitzu. But I think in the case of tzitzis, they all interpret the Rambam as saying there's one chefts of a beged. In other words, it's not like tefillin. We have one ma'isa hanocha of the shel rosh, another ma'isa hanocha of the shel yad, so that separates it as two independent mitzvahs, and they're not ma'akvos zuitzu. So you could have one without the other. The famous story after the Shoah that there was someone in the camps who had a shel yad, and after they freed the camps, people were lining on. They hadn't put on tefillin in years because they went from one camp to the other, and they survived the war. They were waiting online to just put on tefillin shel yad. They couldn't even get tefillin shel rosh. But anyway, getting back to this, the Brisa says in Menachos Daf Mem Daled, Ton Rabbanon Chilazon Zeh, there is a creature called Chilazon, and we're going to produce from the blood of the Chilazon Techeiles, Gufo Domeliyam, and its body looks like the sea, Ubriyaso Domeladag, its shape looks like a fish, but you'll only find it on the seashore once in 70 years. Ubidamo, and we extract its blood, sovim tcheles. We could dye something tcheles. In other words, the dye itself is tcheles. And the Brisa tells us it's very expensive. Now, why is it important to know that it's expensive? Not just to scare us away, but because many people were imposters. What do I mean by imposters? They tried to create something that looked like tcheles, and they sold it on the market. And obviously, that's not a very fair business practice. And it's called kola ilon. In other words, they took an extract from a tree, and that extract had the same identical color as tcheles, and no one could tell the difference.
So what's so important that it comes from the pilazim? If Indian is getting the color, like if I could replicate that color synthetically or with another source, who cares?
Right. So that's what we're going to see here as we go through this page 84 and page 85, the significance of chilazon and why the Brisa goes through many details to identify exactly what the chilazon looks like. Okay, Rashi goes through this Brisa, but I think we did a good job on it. Now we're going to fast forward to a Gemara elsewhere in Shas, in Sota Daf Yud Zayin, Hoyer Rabbi Meir Omer Manish Tana Tcheles Mikol Minei Tziv'onim, and this is a very famous statement in the Gemara in the name of Rabbi Meir, which Rashi quotes in his Pirush in Parsha Shlach. Hoyer Rabbi Meir Omer Manish Tana Tcheles Mikol Minei Tziv'onim, Mipnei Shatcheles Domel Yam, Yam Domel Rekia, Rekia Domel Kisei HaKavod, etc., etc. So ultimately, what we're going to get to in a very long process that's made up of many different stages is up to the Rakia, which is Dome Lekisei HaKavod. So when you look at the Techeiles, it's supposed to remind you of the Yam. The Yam is supposed to remind you of the Rakia of the Kisei HaKavod. Now, how do we produce and manufacture Techeiles? He says the following: Talich hafakat hatzeva. Are you gentlemen familiar with the word hafakah? Hafakah is to produce.
Okay.
So to manufacture this dye, which is called Techeiles, we need a chilazon, which, as we said before, was a very, very complicated process, even to get a hold of the chilazon, if it only surfaced once in 70 years. So therefore, there were many people who at the time of Techeiles used to try to imitate the tzeva of Techeiles and create a color, a dye, that was made from a tzevach, which is called, if you take a look on page 85, kala elon. And kala elon is the sap of a certain type of a tree, which they used to produce a dye that was similar in color to the Techeiles. And of course, Chazal got up and they said, don't buy this kala elon. It's not Techeiles. Why? Because kala elon, although it's very similar to Techeiles, the Torah says that you have to take Techeiles. And Techeiles is produced from the dam of a chilazon. Kala elon is something that's very inexpensive. You don't have to wait 70 years to get kala elon. Kala elon grows on the trees in a natural form and is mass produced by those who try to fake out and manufacture an imposter of Techeiles. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises us, as the Gemara records in Bab Metzia Samach Beis, that he will be Asid Lipara, he will punish those who try to, fake us out by selling Kol Elon as if it were Techeiles. The Rambam writes in Perek Beis Hilchos Tzitzis Techeiles hamura b'Torah b'chol makom hitzemer hatzavua kiptoch shebekchol. Ptoch shebekchol is a kind of a utensil where they would pour the tseva, this dye, into, and they would somehow extract from that utensil the dye. And he says the color of Techeiles is domel rakia haniris le'ein hashemesh b'taro shel rakia. But he says the Techeiles hamur b'tzitzis tzarich shetia tzviasa tzvia yedua shomeres b'yofi avlo tishtana. In other words, we need a dye that's permanent in nature. It doesn't disintegrate with the passage of time. And therefore, the Rambam says, Kol shelo nitzba ba'osa tzvia, if it wasn't dyed according to the very specific process as described by the Torah and explained in Torah Sheba'al Peh by Chazal, then it's posel tzitzis. Even if it has a similar color, and it reminds us of the rakia, he gives a few examples, hareze posel tzitzis.
So even if the dye has the same color, which we could do now, and it
Right.
won't fade, like one of the requirements it seemingly had, it still wouldn't be good.
Correct, because it doesn't come from the chilazon. The chilazon produces a kind of a Techeiles. It's almost as if the Torah is saying you have to find this very rare kind of creature. I don't know, we'll call it a fish, if you will. Yeah. And it's got to be rare. It can't be something that, you just produce a color.
So interesting. And then why wouldn't it have said that originally? Because when we first introduced that, you have chilazon, right? The Gemara says, it explains it's a chilazon. What is a chilazon? It doesn't, it was
right. The Gemara tries to give us simanim of what the chilazon looks like and
what
how.
Techeiles is, and it defines Techeiles as chilazon, right?
Well, Techeiles is the blood of the chilazon, right? Bidamo, from the dam of the chilazon, sovim Techeiles. We extract the Techeiles, which we use to color the chutei tzitzis and produce Techeiles, what we call Techeiles. Now, if you take a look on page 86, Tosfos in Masechta Menachos.
One question: is that Gemara the first mention of the chilazon as Techeiles?
Yeah, the first mention in Shas of chilazon is on Daf Mem Daled Amud Aleph in Menachos. The Gemara in Sota is talking about Techeiles as opposed to other kinds of colors and dyes that are similar to Techeiles. But the actual original Techeiles is described by the Gemara Menachos Mem Daled. And what we want to see now is Tosfos there in Menachos Mem Daled. And Tosfos writes that mitzvah losei shnei chutei Techeiles u'shnei chutei lavan b'tzitzis. Now there's going to be a whole bunch of different Rishonim that define how many chutim have to be Techeiles and how many have to be lavan. Is it going to be 3 lavan and 1 Techeiles? Is it going to be 3.5 lavan and a half Techeiles? Is it going to be 2 and 2? Tosfos' sheet that we're learning now is 2 and 2. And 2 and 2 basically means 4 and 4, if you follow what I mean, because we double over the chutim. So we have 2 and 2. V'im tovim nolan to be in beis chutei lavnu beis chutei Techeiles yeshlomer came in the tray mine boy rachmana. Tosfos says I don't have a source for this, but it's logical that the Tosfos, if the Torah requires both Techeiles and lavan, we should assume that they're equal, and therefore it's going to be 2 and 2. We split the 4 down half. The od psil Techeiles kasiv upsil mashma trei. Now this is a big chiddush at Tosfos, quoting a sugya in Yuma, and the Gemara there says that psil means shnayim. You and I would have said that psil means 1, it's in the singular. But Chazal understood that the word psil is itself like a weaving of 2 strands together. So each strand is separate from the other, and therefore you need 2 strands. So psil Techeiles means 2, and then you have lavan, which is 2, so you have 2 and 2 is 4. Okay, fine. The Rambam. Say it again.
Is the lashon of psil used elsewhere?
Yeah, the lashon of psil is used by the Gemara in Yuma for kitzeis psilim, which has to do the avodah of Beis Hamikdash. We'd have to look up the Gemara inside to see all the details. Mm-hmm. So the Rambam writes something against Tosfos. The Rambam writes in Hilchos Tzitzis Techeiles, "V'yeh echad mishmona chutim chut Techeiles v'ashiva levanim." So according to the Rambam, basically it's 3.5 lavan, which multiplied by 2 gives you 7, and then there's 1/2 of one of the 4 chutim, which is Techeiles. So basically, according to the Rambam, we have 1/4 of Techeiles compared to what the Tosfos would have, because Tosfos has 2 full chutim, and the Rambam has only 1/2 of 1 chut. Arrive at Hisigel Rambam Nokat. He's got a middle shita, and he holds that it's 6 and 2, which means 3 and 1. So again, let's just summarize. We have shitas at Tosfos 2 and 2, shitas Rambam 3.5 and a half, shitas Arrivad 3 and 1, which again we always double. And where did the Rambam come up with this idea that half of a chut should be Techeiles, which means 3.5 and a half? So the Kesef Mishnah suggests on page 87 that it says psil Techeiles, and the Rambam is totally what's the word I want to use? He's totally disinterested. We'll use that word. Disinterested of the Gemara in Yuma. He's completely disqualified the Gemara in Yuma. Apparently, he maybe had a different girsa, a different interpretation, but he holds that the word psil, like we thought, was in the singular. So that means if you have 4 chutim, and you're going to double them over to make 8 chutim, and the Torah says 1 psil is Techeiles, it's going to be 1/2 of 1 chut, so you can have 3.5 and 1/2, or if you want to call it 7.5 and 1/2. Now here he quotes Rav Yosef Dov HaLevi Soloveitchik. I'm not 100% sure who that is. I think it's my Rebbe, but I can't tell you for sure. He says, Nira lavchin bein shtei parshiyot shel tzitzis. B'sefer Dvarim, Gedilim tasel chal arba kanfos ksuscha. The Torah in Parshas in Parshas Eikev doesn't mention a word about Techeiles. So let's go back and see if he quotes the Psukim. I think we may have skipped that. No, he doesn't have it here. Maybe he has it at the very beginning of Hilchos Tzitzis. Let me just see. Page 35. You see on the bottom of page 35, without losing our place here on page 87, Gedilim Taselecha al Arba Kanfos Ksuscha Shetachaseba. Guess what? No mention of Techeiles. So that's in Parshas Ki Teitze. I said it was Eikev, it's Ki Teitze. But if you take a look at Parshas Shlach, there the Torah says, V'nostu al tzitzis hakanof psil Techeiles. He says the following: Haparsha b'sefer dvar mosekes b'chiyuv lasos gedil michutei tzitzis. So we need the whole gedil, right? The whole gedil is the big deal, right? The big deal. It means, all the different ksharim and how we tie it on to the whole of the knaf habeged. And that gedil is made up of chutei tzitzis. So again, when the Torah says in Parshas Kitetse, it says Gedilim Tasalecha, we're talking about the Gedil. Whereas in contrast, when we get to the Parsha in Bamidbar, which is Parsha Shlach, there the Torah introduces Techeiles with the language Psil Techeiles. So what is Psil? And how is it different than Gedil? Right? We have Gedil and we have Psil. He says, Sham, Milosham Psil, Mechadeshes HaTorah Halacha Shel Kricha. So Psil is something that you wrap around. And Mizel Omen Aramam Shekricha Hidin B'Tcheles. Hamachayeves Likros Es Chut HaTcheles Misviv L'Chutei HaTzitzis. Did any of you gentlemen wear Techeiles? No. So if you look at some people, again, there's so many different minhagim in Techeiles. For those who wear, I don't wear Techeiles, but for those who do, but one minhag is to fulfill the Shitas Rambam, and that is that the Techeiles should be wrapped around the Chutei Tzitzis, right? That those are the various krichos. Now, why is that so? Because the Torah, with regard to Techeiles, use the word psil, and psil, according to the Rambam, means that it's bekricha. Ubederech zu onim mevinim betuv tavlas is kriyas haramam she'ein litzvoa ela chatzi chut. Why is it that only one half of one chut is dyed Techeiles? And the answer is kavanu miloshem psil din bekricha upsil Techeiles einu el chut hatcheles shekarchem bo. So basically, the chut of Techeiles, according to the Rambam, is the lower part of the kricha. In other words, the upper part of the Techeiles was used as a kricha. And that means that it wraps around the other chutim. So basically, it doesn't really have the status of one of the gdilim. It only has the status of kricha, which is called psil. And Rav Soloveitchik here is claiming that as a result of that definition of Techeiles as psil, which means that according to the Rambam you need kricha, the Rambam came to the conclusion that all you need is chatzi chut. Why? Because the rest of that chut is used for kricha. So how much are you left after you did the kricha and you wrapped around the Techeiles all around to create a gedil? You're left with only one half of the chut, because the other half of the chut you use for what? For kricha. Now he has a beautiful picture on page 88.
Hanging down 7, then no? Then you wouldn't see 8.
Well, no. Again, the kricha is a separate chut, meaning you've got 4 chutim, correct?
Yeah.
But one of the chutim is going to be used for kricha.
Okay.
So that chut that's used for kricha will only produce a half of a chut after the kricha. You mean below the kricha? And that's
below
gonna
the
be-
kricha would be white, and then a separate string would have half be
Correct,
blue.
correct.
So in reality, the way the Rav understands the Rambam is you need two halves, two single halves. Okay.
So now let's look at this picture and see if we can make sense out of it.
Alright.
How many individual footprints do you have?
Oh, so that's what I want to show you in this picture here on page 88, picture number 7, if you see. You see that? Why does he call it number 7? Because 7 out of 8 of those chutim that are coming down are lavan. Only one, which is really a half of a chut, is tcheles. The rest of that one single chut, you'll see, is up on top doing the krichos. However, he has another interpretation of the Rambam, and basically, what really comes out is, if you look at all the other shitos, what you're going to find is that the kricha is done by both lavan and tcheles. The Rambam only uses tcheles as lavan. So again, it's a little bit confusing in the picture. But if you take a look at the krichos, like for example, let's take a look at Rav Amram Gaon, which would be the second from the right. And what you'll see in Rav Amram Gaon is in the krichos, on top you'll see white, blue, white, blue, white, blue. So assuming Rav Amram Gaon is like Tosfos, and Tosfos says there's an equal number of chutim of both lavan and tcheles, so you've got 2 and 2, and therefore in the krichos you're going to have an equal number of krichos from lavan and from tcheles. In any event, he says the following: Madua hufsika hatolas tcheles. Where did we lose historically the tcheles? Where did it go down the tube, so to speak? And he writes here that bishlav misuyam leorech historia yudud hufsika hatolas hatcheles bekanfos habeged bitoch chutei tzitzis. So we start with the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, and he says that the pasuk says L'doros Seichem, L'doros Sam, which means that we should always have tcheles. Achen l'tzad sheyesh b'mitzvus tzitzis shnei dvarim halavan hatcheles, halavan yesh them b'chol hazman, but hatcheles yesh zman sheinu matzui. Again, the Orach Chaim doesn't give you a biological reason or a historical reason in terms of the transmission, but he says that we simply don't find tcheles. So why did the Torah say that you should wear tzitzis l'dorosam when you didn't even guarantee that you'll have tcheles? The answer is because the Torah is telling you that even in the absence of tcheles, even in those doros and those generations where you cannot find and access tcheles, nevertheless, there's lavan l'dorosam. You'll have chutei lavan for all generations. Aval tcheles, there will be generations sheinu nimtza, and therefore, if you can't find tcheles, you're not chayav in tcheles. And yet, even though you only have lavan, we are going to access and rely on the sheet of the chachamim that einat tcheles makavus al lavan. So we can fulfill the mitzvah l'doros, not through tcheles, because we don't have tcheles, but rather through lavan. But einat tcheles makavus al lavan. Now he writes on the bottom of this page, I'm not sure exactly where he gets this from, that seva tcheles nignas. I don't know what he means here. It sounds like he's telling you that they took the tcheles and they tied it up somewhere in a jar, in a bottle, and maybe Spielberg will find it in the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I don't know, but it's not to be found. And on page 89, he writes that mitzvah lavi lavanu tcheles v'yaseh amos like sheyesh tcheles. Achshav ein lanu ela lavan. So already in the Medrash Tanchuma, which goes back a long time, he says that the tcheles was hidden away in Geniza, and we're only left with the mitzvah of lavan.
When was the Medrash Tanchuma?
I think about 15 centuries ago, if I'm not mistaken. It's like really old.
And all these shitas of tying, it's only applicable if you have tcheles? Because
I didn't follow what you mean.
the picture chart.
Yeah.
with the different.
Yeah, this is all if you have Techeiles.
Right, so, because today we do the first one on the right, yeah, people without Techeiles, right, the 7, 8, 11, 13 is not the most standard one?
Well,
That people
I'm not
without
sure what you
Techeiles-
mean because in that right picture here,
Yeah.
Techeiles is very high profile. If
No,
you
no, but I mean, like, people that don't have Techeiles, that
Right.
wear white,
right.
isn't that the standard way we tie here?
Oh yeah. That's pretty
Does-
much the
Does
case.
anybody tie the other ways without Taylor?
Like, I've never seen like the, right.
Well,
Those
again,
sit down.
some of the other
That's
pictures
good.
are only meaningful because they had Techeiles.
Something like
You know,
the,
if you-
the Rambam or the Avron Gaon, like those,
Rambam's pretty different.
yeah, like, it's just, you don't even see any kesher, it's just like a wrapping.
Right. Now, Rabosa, I see we have about 15 minutes left. So I'm going to ask you the following question. Would you want to finish up on Techeiles, and that's where we'll end, or possibly discuss what's called the ituf, how to put it on the talis? Because we don't have that much time.
Wherever you want to go, it's good.
That sounds good.
Okay, so let's make a note. Maybe we'll be able to finish this another time. If somebody could just, make a note and maybe send me a WhatsApp or whatever it is that we got up to page 89, because I don't seem to have I don't want to write in this safer, it's not mine.
Feels on
Took a picture.
You have Yechiel? Okay. Picture of page 89. So you'll send me that page. But now, let's go back to Godel Hatzitzis V'ituf Ba. That's number 6. So we were reading number 7, I believe, right? Here, number 6 begins on page 69. You have it?
Yeah.
Okay. So let me just summarize a few points here so that we'll be able to make progress in the few minutes that we have left. Point number 1 is that we have both a talis gadol, which wraps around the entire body and the head and everything, and then we have a talis katan. A talis katan is chayiv in tzitzis. What is the minimum size of a talis katan? So the Bryce and Menachos says it's a talis shakatan miskasebo rosho verubo. A katan, and we'll soon see that means a 9-year-old child, can cover most of his body and his head with that talis. That makes it into a beged that's large enough to generate a chiyuv tzitzis. Now, if you turn to page 70 for a moment, he's going to reduce this into centimeters. And he's going to try to tell you exactly what the shear is. Now, do you see where number 7 is on the bottom, that the Alkut Yosef? Yeah, on page 70, yes, we have it. A little bit above that, Lamaisa. You see that word Lamaisa? Shir ha'orech ha'minimali b'chol tzad hu shloshet rivei amma. How much is shloshet rivei amma? That's a machlokes. If you've ever heard of Reb Chaim Noah and the Chazon Ish, they're always at each other and at each other's necks in terms of what an amma is. But in any event, according to Reb Chaim Noah, 3/4 of an amma, which is the minimum size of the length of the beged for tzitzis, and for that matter, the width of the beged as well, is 36 centimeters. Now, I can't measure that right here, but if you ask me, this small area is about 36 centimeters. But the Chazon Ish has 45 centimeters. And now if you take a look at the Piskei Tshuva, which maybe is a more Hasidic approach, on page 71, he has 58 centimeters. So look at the difference here. We went from 36 to 45. Now we're jumping up to 58. And the Piskei Tshuvas writes that if you want to be Yotzei everyone's Shita and make sure that you're fulfilling the mitzvah of tzitzis, then to satisfy all the Shitas, you want to get something that's 58 centimeters wide. That's like really, really wide. Probably, 3/4 of the table. Now, I checked my tzitzis, and I found that they were about 48 centimeters. So I'm falling in between the cracks. I'm okay with the Chazon Ish, but I'm not so good with the Piskei Tshuvas. Now he discusses on the bottom of page 71 that immediately after you wash your hands in the morning, you should wrap yourself in the talis. First make the bracha, of course, over lasiyasan and in a standing posture. How do we know you have to stand? For the mitzvah of ituf b'talis, we derive it from Gzeira Shava lachem from Sfiras HaOmer. Because in both Omer it says Usfartem lachem, and in Tzitzis, what does it say in Tzitzis? Remind me. It says no, help me out here, guys. What does it say? Oh, vayolachem litzitzis. Right, vayolachem litzitzis. So lachem. So now we're equating tzitzis with Omer. And what does it say in the Omer? It says me'achel bakoma, hachamesh bakoma. And kama, the Gemara says, is bakoma. So that when you recite the Sfiras HaOmer, you stand. And now, by virtue of an equation, when you put on the tzitzis, then you stand. And the Rosh says that whenever you do a mitzvah, you do it in a standing position. I'm sorry, whenever you recite a bracha, you do it in a standing position. So we have the bracha standing and the ituf standing, and we all derive this from the Omer. Now, if you fast forward to page 73, because I'm trying to just highlight some points here.
And now we're talking about talis katan now? Like after you says you wash your hands, you put it on.
Right.
So basically a tifas harosh with talis katan?
No, I don't think so.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
is the same thing about a tifas harosh? I don't think so.
But it's like a tifa. So
No, I think the word atifa is referring to a katan just to get the shear, the minimum size of the beggar.
Okay.
Correct? If you see the word ituf. The word ituf then becomes very relevant to the talis gadol.
Right.
And in fact, there are two different brachos. The bracha we make on a talis katan is al mitzvah tzitzis, whereas the bracha on a talis gadol is lihis atef b'tzitzis. And lis atef is a verb from the noun of ituf. And ituf is an absolute requirement in the talis gadol. And the Torah writes that ituf should be ka'atifas Yisraelim. Now, atifas Yisraelim is a halacha that's derived from avelus, because in the laws of avelus, an ovel has to be otef rosho, and the Gemara says otef rosho means that he covers his head. And if we apply the standards of atifas Yishmaelim to tzitzis, and when we say lisate tzitzis, we're talking about an ituf similar to atifas Yishmaelim, then it means we have to cover our head. It's not enough to cover your body. And this is going to be the shita of the Gaonim. Now, you and I know that we usually do ituf by covering our head. And that, I didn't tell you anything new. But in truth, what I want to tell you is that in all likelihood, you don't have to cover your head. Because we paskin like the Bala Itur, which you'll see here in the middle of page 73, he writes, Lo be'inin kuli hai. The Torah requires kisui, to cover your body. It does not require ituf. Ituf, he says, is an addition, and it really belongs to the laws of avelus. But as far as the laws of tzitzis, the Torah says that you're wearing a beged that has tzitzis on it. And when you wear a beged, you don't cover your head. I mean, there are, in the rain, you'll cover your head. So therefore, according to the Beis Yosef, and that's what we're going to see here in the Shulchan Aruch on page 74, then Seder Atifaso is Kederech B'nei Adam. It's the normal way that you walk out in the street with begadim on. Do you wear begadim over your head? Sheves Kasib Iksusav Yoskim Emalachtam. Pa'amim, maybe sometimes if it's raining or if it's cold, Bekisi Arosh, but Pa'amim Begili Arosh. He'll only cover his body, he won't cover his head. However, the Shulchan Aruch says, V'nachon, he now wants to satisfy the shita of the Gaonim, Nachon she'echasa rosho b'talis. It's, shall we say, highly recommended that you cover your head with the talis. But again, it's not absolutely required. He quotes here the Mishnah Brura, who says that his atvus b'tzitzis means his atvus ha-guf, guf meaning without the head, just cover your body. So therefore, ein chova latov is rosho. But on the other hand, we want to be yotzei the shita of atifas yishmaelim, and therefore he says, Yechase b'talis es rosho. Oh, what does he say here? Just 1 second. I'm going to Satev. Oh, he's bothered by the Lashon of bracha. The bracha is Lisatev. And that seems to imply that he wraps his body around it. He says that wrapping your body is ituv. We identify ituv as covering your head. So what is it? Do we need to cover our head or do we need to cover our body? And it seems like, according to the strict letter of the law, all you have to do is cover your body the way you do with begadim when you go out to do your malach. But because of this possible equation that the Torah codifies between ituf of an avel and ituf in the bracha of lisativ with tzitzis, therefore we're going to cover our head with the tzitzis. So we put the talis over our head. Now on page 76 in the Piskei Tshuvos, he goes through step by step the process of atifa. Now the question I have to ask for you is, do you have another 5 minutes or you want to run to Myrav? I daven Myrav already.
I think even if I'm 2 minutes late, it won't make a difference.
Oh yeah, it could be that till people gather because of the weather. I know at Mincha we had to wait a little bit, and Myrav at 6:30 we waited a little bit. So I just want to show you in the Piskei Tshuvos, which is here on page 76. First, he tells you that based on the Ari, which is more of a Kabbalistic approach, we should do Atifas Yishma'elim. Fine. But then in the paragraph that starts Achen, I don't know if you can find that, he goes through step by step the process of Atifas Yishma'elim. And honestly, I am totally lost. If you guys could help me, I would be very, very thankful. He says the following. He says, Lasos atifas hashmelim kehogen, the right way of doing it is the hainu shachelek ha'elyon shalatalis. Now, again, I don't know exactly what chelek elyon shalatalis is. I guess he means where you put the, what's it called, the atara, or maybe you have that, the bracha of, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah. So maybe that's the chelek elyon shalatalis. I think that's arbitrary, meaning there's no reason why that's called the Chelek HaElyon. Anyway, he takes the Chelek HaElyon Shalatalis, Machasa Rosho Umitzcho. What's Mitzcho? His forehead. Ad L'Mala Me'einayim. But he should not dip below the eyes. So his eyes are not covered. A lot of people, I think, don't do it that way. Now, he's not finished yet. V'Chelek HaChori Shalatalis, Yechases Rov Hagav. Okay, that's okay. So you have the top part of the talis, which is called the Chelek HaElyon, that's covering your head. And where's the rest of the talis? That is hanging over your back and is covering most of your back. I mean, that's going to give us an idea how large the talis is. Then he says, Makabetz Lefonov, he gathers together in front of him, Dalit Knofos, Umashlichon Lachorov Me'al Seifo Asmolis. He should throw it over his left shoulder. That's okay. Are we doing okay?
So far, so good.
Okay, here's where I get lost. Now he's got the lower part of the talis, right, as opposed to the part where the atar was over his head. And he wraps that lefanov in front of his body. How does he do that?
You gathered it, you threw it over your left, right, shoulder.
And then what? The Chelek HaTachton, which is the bottom of your talis, is over your body. I'm not exactly sure how you pull that off exactly.
Ran out of talis fast.
And look what he says. To what extent does the bottom part of your talis have to cover your body up front? Okay, that we said. And then he says, what's a chazeh in English? A chest. He's covering a chest with the back part of his talis. Ulamala, and once he covers his chest, he brings up the bottom part of his talis all the way up to his nose. Adachotel. I never saw such a thing. Nimtza shekol chelek gufo elyon, his entire upper half of his body, which means the chest, utstade panav, and now on both sides of his face, and not only that, he took it up to his nose. So pivu mitzcho, the metzach was covered by the chelek elyon, and now his mouth is being covered by the chelek tachton. Is everything in his body is covered, except for what? Except for his eyes. Because the Torah commands us to read some so you got to see the talis. And if you're going to cover your eyes, you won't see the talis. I don't know, Rabbosai. This just boggles my mind. I never saw anything like this. And not only that, if I would try to imitate this, I would probably fall on my face, you know. How can you get, I don't have a talis here. Maybe, is there a talis? Oh, here's a talis. Let's try a quick experiment here. Okay. I'm wearing 2 pairs of pants because of the rain. Here, what's going to be? Okay, let's see. I just don't want to get this wet here. Oh my gosh, the whole floor is wet. We'll try to do this. Okay. So this now we get to the easy part, right? Right. He's holding the talis over his head, right? And he's making a bracha. Right? Holding over his head. Okay, now this is the chelek elyon, and he covers his head up to his eyes, but not his eyes. Then, okay, don't fall. Then he grabs the 4 sides of the knofos, right? And what's he doing now? He's throwing them over his left shoulder, correct? One second. Not doing such a great job. Okay, now what happens? How does he get the chelek hatachton over his chest all the way up to his nose? That's where I get lost.
Well, if you release that,
Okay,
now
what happens? You want to help me out here, Yehuda? Because I can't do
I
it.
don't know. I mean, maybe then if you
You want to pick up the talis here and throw it over my chest? I don't know. Maybe he means that this itself is somehow covering my chest. But how does it get up to my nose? Because he says the only part of my body that's not covered by the talis is my eyes.
Right.
I don't get it. My moms don't get it.
So
Either
what-
I'm dumb and I don't know how to read the text, or I'm dumb and I don't know how to do it. But either way, I can't figure this
So when
out.
we see people do like one side and then the other side, that's just like made up.
I've seen people go in both directions. I don't know exactly what they're doing.
Right.
You want to help me with this? I just don't want to get it wet. Here, you take it, yeah, and I'll take the other hand. Yeah, all right.
But yeah, I think like, you know, so like we've seen people like take it like this, right? And then they'll almost do like 1, 2, or
Okay,
this
that's
side,
good.
that side.
Just make sure that you can, you don't cover your
Right,
eyes.
like
That's,
over the eye.
you know,
So like, okay, so if you
that's
grab
what he's saying. You don't cover your eyes.
this and this, and both over the left,
That's good.
and now the middle part can cover your chest a little bit.
Yeah, but he says rov hachazeh, and then it goes up to the nose. I'm not exactly how does he get up?
Like he's
Unless maybe the chelek hatachton is something different than what I think. It's different part of the talis.
After the Chabad, I believe the Talis doesn't have an Atara Bechlal.
So what's the chelek elyon?
Exactly, according to them, there is no top or bottom. Like every day could be different. What's the, I don't know.
Whatever you're in the mood for, I guess, on that day.
That's understood.
All right, Rabbosai, we'll stop here, and maybe next time we'll finish on Techeiles.
The Rav didn't wear tcheles?